Cool. Yeah, so Annabelle and I are really excited by the opportunity to share with everyone here our own journey as we've learned how to make more inclusive products using a process that we call thoughtful design. Just an overview of what we'll be talking about today. First, we'll talk a little bit about who we are at Exygy and who are some of the people that we serve in our work. Next, we'll zoom in and walk you through a day in the life of one of the typical people that we serve. We'll then take a look at the approach that we've developed called thoughtful design, and we'll go one by one through each of the principles that we've started to develop with this approach. Those include recognizing exclusion, mapping cognitive and emotional strain, inviting people with lived experiences to the process, and designing for the margins. And then as we wrap up, in case you heard anything that might be useful to you in your own process, we'll provide some takeaways that you can use on your journey. And finally, at the end, we'll make sure we hold some space because there's a lot of stuff we're going to be talking about, and we'll have some space for some Q&A if anybody has any follow-up questions. So a little bit about us and why it takes two people to talk about thoughtful design. Annabelle and I have a range of skills that kind of go from design operations on the tactical side to UX design and more like user outreach. My name's Jesse. I'm design director here at Exygy, focused on design operations and design systems. And what that means is I'm kind of there to help steward building these reusable building blocks that the rest of our team is going to use during the design and development process. Our goal with design systems is to deliver consistent and accessible experiences to as many people as possible. The big project that I get to work on is called Bloom, which is an affordable housing platform for the Bay Area and beyond. Annabelle is going to kick us off, and I'll come back later and talk some more about some of the principles focused on design delivery.
Thanks, Jesse. Hey everyone, I'm Annabelle Campos. I'm the Director of User Experience Design at Exygy. And I like to say that my main goal as a user experience design director is to really deeply understand users' context, their goals, their needs, their motivations, their behaviors, the psychology, and make sure that whatever products, programs, services that we are designing not only meet them where they are, but really do so in a way that is highly inclusive, equitable, and accessible. One of the projects that I have been working on lately is with an organization called CRAP, which they have an amazing reentry program for justice-involved people. And we are designing a portal to support the participants of that program, and also like a resource hub to support the reentry journey of just justice-involved folks in general. So let's dive into Exygy and talk a little bit about who we are and who we serve. So Exygy partners with social impact organizations to design and build technology that improves lives. We're basically a group of designers, product managers, engineers, and operations, marketing, and sales folks who have been around for 19 years now, creating digital products that are truly centered on the community needs. So we deeply believe that more inclusive innovation is possible, and we are always rethinking our design practices to achieve that. So working in the intersection of technology and social impact, we serve users in a lot of different areas and with a lot of different goals. We work with housing, with government benefits, healthcare, social services, legal aid, and reentry programs, like I mentioned. That means that our audience is oftentimes a lot more diverse and unserved, vulnerable than the audience of other design studios and big tech companies, right? So we might design for people that are monolingual, that are justice involved, that have low income, they're immigrants, that might be subject to racism, might be experiencing trauma, might have limited internet connection, and might live within a range of disability. So we invite you all now to follow what a day in the life of one of our users might look like. So introduce you to Joanna, a single mom of two. Joanna is currently unhoused. She's going through financial stability right now. She's colorblind and she has to provide for her two kids. And in order to do that, she needs to apply for government benefits. So let's see what that looks like. So Joanna starts her day at 5 a.m. She wakes up and remembers right away that she needs to apply for government benefits today. She sighs and gets out of bed. As she makes breakfast for her kids, she notices that she's running low on food. She makes yet another mental note. She stopped by the grocery store after work, but she also needs to stop at the Social Security office. So Joanna arrives at her first job and she works quickly before she has to leave for her second job. Her mind does keep wandering though to the financial issues that she's dealing with and the stress and uncertainty of it all. And then without even a lunch break, Joanna runs to her second job. She greets customers with a smile and she scans her items quickly. She's been working at this store for a few months now and she has got used to the long hours and the demanding customers. After work, she has to make a decision between going to the grocery store and buying food or going to the Social Security office. She tries to do both and she kind of arrives late at the Social Security office. They are already closing, but they tell her that she can apply, she can actually do the application online. She then runs to the public library to use a computer, and she accesses the website with a certain difficulty because her color blindness, and this is what she finds. Hopefully it's not too small on your screen, but at a first glance, this seems like a decently designed form, right? Maybe mostly follows UX best practices. It seems clean, straightforward. It could probably work for most people. But the truth is, for Joanna, mostly following UX best practices is not enough. She's not most people. There are small issues with this application that turn into really big issues for her. For example, the form is only available on a desktop, and Joanna has to make a special trip to the library on her already very busy day. There are also too many steps, 1 of 18 is showing there, with no expectation of how long it takes to complete. So Joanna's now wondering if she's going to have time to complete this before she goes home to her kids. They also use colors that are not accessible to Joanna and that end up like kind of straining her eyesight. There's a question here about her kids being enrolled in the state confidential address program. She doesn't really know what this is, and now she feels a little stuck on like how to answer it. It also asks her if she's experiencing housing instability. That's an emotionally charged question for her. And now she feels butterflies in her stomach. She's afraid that that might happen again. Finally, there's also no way for her to save and continue later. So at every step, she's concerned that a mistake, she might make a mistake or an error might occur, and she will lose all of her work. So as you can see, there are a lot of emotions that Joanna feels when completing this form, and those emotions might actually deter her from doing so. The truth is that there are a lot more factors impacting Joanna's experience. She's sleep deprived, not sleeping too many hours a night. She's also experiencing scarcity mindset, which is a psychology concept that says that when you're too preoccupied with something that you have little of, you have less cognitive capacity to focus on decisions and tasks that are not related to that domain. The fear of not being able to provide for her kids just puts her under constant stress and anxiety. And her color blindness impacts how she interacts with the world. So we designed for Joanna. We designed for people like Joanna, but we're not Joanna. And human-centered design thinking methodologies, they tell us that we need to start the design process by empathizing with our users. But serving people like Joanna, we really question if just empathy is it enough? We believe that the human impact of the social issues we design for just calls for a more intentional process. And that's what triggered us to rethink our process a little bit. So Jesse and I and the design team at Exygy started then imagining a design process that uses human-centered design as a foundation, but borrows elements and activities from other design processes, such as equity-centered design, inclusive design, and trauma-informed design, to better serve the needs of the populations we designed for. We started calling it thoughtful design. Is this going to be the final name? We're not sure. But it's supposed to represent a process that supports us to make decisions, design decisions, that take into account personal identifiers of our users like ability, race, economic status, language, age, gender, and cognitive and emotional strengths. And the process we envision for now has 4 new principles. The first one is being more intentional about recognizing exclusion, then mapping cognitive and emotional strengths of our users, inviting people with lived experiences to the table, and designing for the margins first. So I'll talk through the first 2, and Jesse will walk us through the last 2 principles, and we'll talk about what each of these principles are, and then illustrate a little bit how we would use them to tackle Joanna's problem. So let's talk about the first one, recognize exclusion. Well, we all know that implicit biases, power dynamics, invisible structures like timelines, budgets, profitability, they all impact the decisions that we make about our design process and who we invite to it. Are we going to do a user test? Do we have time for research? Who are we testing with? Who's invited? Who's not invited? All of those decisions depend on sometimes stronger forces than just us. And when we are on autopilot, we don't really think about those decisions that much and how they might actually bias the final product of our designs. So it's important to pause, reflect, and question which voices are we leaving out of the design process. So this activity is composed of 3 steps. Pause. So building in pauses to slow us down and be more intentional throughout the process. Reflect. Reflecting internally about our team's positionality and which voices we're missing. And map. Looking at our user groups and understanding who's most at the margins and who has the highest barriers to access. So let's think about Joanna's case. How did that show up here? But before even starting the process to design a government benefits application for her, we would start with looking at the internal team that is tackling that problem and reflect on the identities that we're bringing. What are the characteristics that we have in the team? What are the characteristics that we're missing? How might those characteristics bias us? Do we have someone with lived experience of having to rely on government benefits on the team? What are the assumptions that we have? That all helps us understand where we are falling short and helps us plan to bring in extra voices to keep us more diverse and more grounded. We then move on to look externally at our users. We think about the audience that we are working with, and before even putting together a research plan, we would map out who is more at the margins to prioritize hearing from them first. So in the case of designing an application for government benefits, that might mean prioritizing people with disabilities or people that are not college educated, for example. People for whom English is the second language, or older adults. And a really good exercise for this is that image here on the right from Equity Meets Design that can help us visualize power and visualize exclusion. The second principle I wanted to talk about is mapping cognitive and emotional strengths. Understanding goals, motivations, pain points is important. Human-centered design and every designer really focuses on that. But when designing for impact, it's crucial to go a little beyond and deeply understand the cognitive and emotional hurdles that that specific community might be experiencing. So what are the emotions and mental processes that might impact this community decision-making approach? So in this activity, we start by eliciting stories from participants with lived experience. Then we synthesize the findings to really pinpoint specific emotions. And from there, we create design principles that will guide our work. So in Joanna's case, we started by inviting Joanna and others to participate in an empathy map exercise. We asked them to jot down the things that they saw, that they heard, that they thought, and they felt when they were going through the process of applying to government benefits previously. We then looked for emotions and cognitive hurdles that are in common between participants, what's bubbling up. With those emotions outlined, we then invite participants to think about design principles that the solution should have to mitigate those emotions and hurdles. And these are not features yet. They are adjectives that the solution should have. So for example, as you can see here on the image to the right, in blue are the emotions. So Joanna might be experiencing fear and anxiety going through that process. That means that the solution should then be supportive, be encouraging, be compassionate, be reaffirming. They help ground us in principles for the designs as we move along, without really actually thinking too much about how those principles will come to life quite yet. They're just grounding adjectives and feelings that the solution should have. And I'll pass it on to Jesse to just walk us through the next principles and the takeaways.
Thanks, Annabelle. So our third principle encourages us to continue to invite people with lived experiences to the table. As we move from product discovery into design and delivery, it's important that we carry forward all those values and relationships from the earlier parts of the design process that Annabelle is outlining. So even if we've done all our research and all proper intention and outreach, we recognize that as we continue, we'll just continue to bring our biases into the solutions that we create unless we do things differently. But we can circumvent all of this by bringing people with lived experiences to the table to break us out of embedded power dynamics in the design process that allow those who are traditionally the audience to become the creators of the solution of the things that actually work best for them. So this brings us to the concept of co-design. So co-design is an approach to design that involves collaboration and shared decision-making between designers and the people who will actually be using the services. It's important to remember that there's no one-size-fits-all approach to co-design, and that it will look, depending on the contents of the constraints of the project, it's going to manifest itself differently. In order to be successful, there are 3 stages that we recommend for each engagement. 1, we want to kick off the process by moving from research into solutions by working with community partners to define what the engagement is actually going to look like. This includes shared goal setting, workshop planning, and defining what it is that we're trying to get done. Next, we move into the engagement itself, where we began our outreach for the workshop participants. This can include really informal get-to-know-you sessions leading up to the event. Then the workshop itself includes a set of activities that allow the participants to sketch design solutions in real time themselves. Finally, after the workshop, we conduct follow-up, which includes sending out post-workshop surveys and continued engagement as we move into the delivery phase of the project. So in Joanna's case of designing the application, when it was time to actually do design work, we didn't want to go off into our corner as designers and think up solutions for her. We wanted to invite Joanna to be part of the creation process and have her design it with us. A couple of things we did in that process that we found were super helpful were finding a liaison between us and the community to help design a co-creation workshop. In this case, we reached out to a family services organization where Joanna gets assistance. We had weekly sessions with caseworkers there to review the workshop agenda, get feedback on the activities, the language we were using, any needs from the community. This included how we're going to communicate the things in the most accessible way possible and which tools we were going to use that were actually going to make sense to the participants. We created a co-design session where Joanna and others were invited to contribute, vote, and choose possible solutions, as well as design what those solutions would actually look like. To make sure the session was as accessible as possible to Joanna, we used Google Slides to co-design those ideas. We created a really simple toolkit with simple shapes and visual elements, and Joanna and the group would discuss potential solutions, and the designer just sort of moved those pieces around and eventually created a low-fidelity wireframe based on the discussion that was happening naturally. We continued to engage with Joanna after the workshop. We got valuable feedback that helped us improve our internal process, which included a suggestion to communicate the workshop schedule with participants via text messaging as well as email, because that would allow Joanna to get timely updates. We also stayed in touch with Joanna as we moved into prototyping, which we'll talk about here in a minute, where she continued to engage and keep us aligned. So in the end, it was Joanna who was the creative mind behind the solution. And the designers were just a tool that were there to sort of document that process. The process allowed her to visualize a design without having any specialized technical skill. Last design principle is the idea of designing for the margins. If we want to design inclusively, we need to design first for those who have the biggest barriers to access. And if we design for them, we end up creating solutions for everyone else. So this brings us to this concept of the curb cut effect, which I'll take a minute to kind of describe for you. In the Bay Area in the 70s, there was a group of residents who used wheelchairs, decided to take action and address a problem of getting from the sidewalk to the street. The group took it upon themselves to fix this with a guerrilla tactic of buying some cement and actually creating a ramp to help ease their transition. Over time, they realized that this curb cut that they had created worked not only for them, but for parents with strollers, people with bicycles, people with luggage. The experiment was so popular that within a few years, the city made the practice a law, and now you'll see curb cuts in every major city in the US. So the idea of the curb cut effect is this idea that a feature that was originally designed for a community with a specific set of needs can eventually come to serve larger and larger groups of people. If we take a step back, we can start to see how inclusive websites and the products that we build work better for everyone, not just for those with specific disabilities. Microsoft has done a lot of work in this area and written about it extensively. And at some point in our lives, you'll see that everyone needs and benefits from the principles that we've outlined. That's because over time in our daily lives, we each experience what can be referred to as temporary and situational disabilities. In each of these instances, the changes we put in place for people with permanent disabilities and other inclusive needs end up making for improved experiences for everyone. And as the illustration shows, the number of people who benefit over time just simply grows and grows. One example of how we carry this principle into our build and delivery process and ensure that we're following through on all those commitments we made in the research process includes a set of activities that we're calling inclusive quality assurance. These activities include testing, training, and transferring knowledge. When it comes to testing, it's become important that for us to blend ideas of accessibility testing with people with disabilities, along with this idea of nurturing relationships and ongoing community engagement through continued testing. This allows us to enroll folks who are more like directly impacted by the solutions we're building and help us get the validation that we need. We recognize also that as we raise the bar for inclusive best practices, we need to support the people that are building these things and to meet what is like an increasing demand now. And one way we do this is through specialized training with our community partners. We bring them in as the experts, including bringing in folks who specialize in accessibility to walk us through how to use things like assistive technology. This process builds the empathy for our engineering teams and product teams for those people with lived experiences. Finally, we want to ensure that we're transferring all this knowledge that we've collected over the course of designing this really specialized process and pass it on to our client partners who are going to need to maintain the standards that we've worked to establish. This includes documentation and training with the support teams who will become the ongoing stewards of the work. So how this plays out in Joanna's case is we folded various disabilities and aspects into our core user personas, resulting in more user recruiting of people who experience a range of ability in their daily lives. We also continue to nurture relationships with the community members who had participated in those earlier workshops, including Joanna, to provide additional feedback through usability testing of the application as we were building it. We wanted to ensure our engineering team could deliver on the standards we had outlined from our process, including accessibility needs like color blindness, which directly affects Joanna's ability to access and consume the content. For this, we brought in an expert who works with communities with visual disabilities to train our team on how to identify issues, fix them as part of an ongoing development and QA process. Finally, we wanted to make sure the local government agency that would be taking over and supporting the application would be able to continue to deliver on the process. We developed deliverables that included their creation of a best practices documentation for content design to ensure that there was support for new questions as they were being created, if those were potentially stressful. And as the example earlier, dealing with Joanna's housing situation, as those questions were continuing to be written, offering the ability and guidance on how to write better supportive text to support somebody in that situation. We also delivered an accessibility checklist that staff could use to make sure that they were following accessibility guidelines as they continued to create new content. So, how does all this flow back into the solution that we created for Joanna? Well, it looks like this. First, we focused on a mobile-first design, allowing Joanna to access the application at any time, not just having to make special trips to the public library. 2, at the start of the application, we set expectations and let Joanna know how much time and effort it would take to complete the application. Next, we added tips and helper text along the way to explain any unfamiliar items. We increased the color contrast of the application to ensure Joanna could access everything. We added section breaks that would allow Joanna to pause if she needed to and come back and finish the process later. And finally, due to the nature of some of the questions being asked, we provided emotionally supportive language to recognize what might be a triggering moment for Joanna. So, in summary, As you may be looking to take a more thoughtful approach to how you do inclusive design yourself, here's a couple things, again, to summarize and keep in mind. First, you want to try to recognize systemic exclusion. You can do this by pausing, reflecting, and asking yourself the question, which voices might I be leaving out of our design process? Next, you want to map cognitive and emotional strain of your user groups. You can do this by asking your team which emotions and mental processes impact this community's decision making. Then you want to ensure that you are continually inviting people with lived experiences to the table, and so they can create solutions that work best for them. And finally, you want to make sure that you are designing for the margins. By creating solutions for those who have the biggest barriers to access, you can subsequently produce solutions for wider and wider audiences. So I just want to note here that we don't have a copyright on any of the things that we looked at today. We're on this journey with you, and for that reason, we're always keeping an eye out for resources, and we wanted to share some of those resources with you, as well as some of the partners that we've worked with over time as we sort of just stitch this thing together. So we have some links, and these will all be shared afterwards, so don't feel like you have to take all these notes now or screenshot anything. But these are some folks who work in the space of inclusive, equity-centered design. And then we also have a set of resources for accessibility organizations, as well as some resources your teams can leverage to make sure that you're sort of doing this on an ongoing basis. Yeah, you can feel free to reach out to Annabelle and I and connect with us online at any time, as well as Exygy itself. And now I think we have some time to take some questions.
Awesome. I already see a question here on the chat from Anne. Will Joanna get the design credit as a co-designer along with the team? I think that first, for sure, she should. When working with clients, sometimes that's not always possible. I think that she should get the credit, but definitely she should be compensated for her time participating in all of those activities. That is time that she's taking off of her life. So that's time that we should be compensated her. So for sure, that's a best practice that we like to follow. What other questions do folks have? No, Jesse left. I'll keep an eye on the chat. Where do you share those links you had on the slides? I think the slides are gonna be shared with folks after this. Definitely the recording will be shared. I think the slides as well. Anna, if you're there, if you're somewhere, you can confirm that. That'd be great. Perfect. Cool. Okay. We still have 9 minutes. Why do you feel that inclusive design is not already TOEFL? I love that. I think inclusive design is definitely TOEFL. I think what we're saying is that we're not saying that we do only inclusive design, because I think inclusive design is very broad, and I think we're really focusing on designing for digital solutions. So I think we're we're saying that our process has pieces of inclusive design for sure, but it's not inclusive design solely. It's not just inclusive design. So that's what we're like kind of distinguishing. I think we're borrowing things from also like trauma-informed design and equity-centered design, and that's what we're calling that awful design. It has pieces of inclusive design for sure, but I think inclusive design is definitely awful. Hopefully that answered your question. In the past, how well have organizations handled the transition from partnering with you to being on their own? Do you mean clients? Can you expand on that question? Clients. Well, we really like to like, yeah, we really like to like make sure that they have what they need to be successful on that transition. So in the past, like what we have done, it depends a lot on different projects, right? But like we like to make sure that we have enough time and mental space and bandwidth to set them up for success. So we a lot of times bake that into our process, the handoff, and that's when we deliver like documentation. We deliver them with a roadmap, a plan. Sometimes we help them hire internally if we feel like, you know what, like you're creating a digital product, but like I don't think you have the right team for, you know, actually like act as a digital like organization. So we'll help you put that team together if that's, you know, that's um, something that they want to do. So we try to bake that into the process, like having that phase at the end where we're making sure that we're delivering all of that and making sure that they are like set up for success. How would you advise designers and UX researchers to recruit UX testing stakeholders, especially people with accessibility needs or emotional needs early in the design process for pre-launch product? That was a big question. To recruit UX testing stakeholders, does that mean like people? Does that mean like people that are gonna be testing, like user testing? That we're going to test with, right? Especially people with accessibility needs or emotional needs, early in the process. So what we do, Clayton, is like really like we lean a lot on a couple of partners. We lean either on our clients and, you know, they will be testing. You let me back. I'm answering the Clayton's question. So we lean either on our clients and like we want to make sure that we can use them, or you know they have a community already that we could use to recruit those folks, right? Or we partner with other organizations, for example, and Jesse's like really the best person to talk about this. We partner with Lighthouse for the Blind, and they will either like help us with that, or you know they also have a network of folks that we can reach out to. So we kind of use those two partners a lot, like as like liaisons in the process. That can not only like helps us like recruit, but also like build a relationship with folks in the community, right? Like they can kind of act as that building that like relationship and credibility with us, because it's also like
Did Annabelle drop? Or let's see. Oh yeah, cool. I know I just dropped and I got cut off too, so I wasn't sure if I was in the vacant room or she is. So I'll finish that question. The important thing about the accessibility stuff is maintaining those relationships over time. So the partner that Annabelle mentioned, Lighthouse for the Blind, we've worked with them for years, and so the idea is like with good partnerships, it's not like an opportunistic thing. Like, hey, we have a job, can you help us? It's a matter of like having that relationship and maintaining that relationship over time, and then continuing to communicate with them so that as opportunities come up, that partnership is a lot deeper and it's a lot easier to access folks who you need, who are actually able to give you more accurate feedback. Yeah. Let's see. There's additional questions here. Did Annabelle get through the other questions? Is there any of these questions that we have not gone through yet? Yeah, for sure. No, thank you both. Thank you, everybody, for showing up. And yeah, thank you for all your follow-up questions. Really appreciate it. It's really interesting stuff for us and really always encouraged to see and meet other folks who have similar interests. So yeah, please feel free to reach out to us additionally if you have any other questions. And yeah, hopefully the resources that Anna shared earlier will help other folks as you continue to work on this stuff. So yeah, thank you all so much. And enjoy the rest of the conference. I'm sure there's lots of other talks coming up. And yeah, there's that link again if anybody has additional questions. So yeah, thank you.